Hello my friend, this is a video on existential freedom in a series I have created on existential freedom in celebration of the publication of my book Beginning to Live, the Art of Existential Freedom. And this particular video is about Friedrich Nietzsche's ideas on existential freedom. Friedrich Nietzsche was a German philosopher at the end of the 19th century, and he ended up living in Switzerland. He didn't believe that freedom was a right you were born with, but a conquest you had to make. It was something you had to fight for, you had to acquire. He loathed the idea of free will in the sort of traditional sense. He called that a theologian's artifice, because he believed that it was a device to make people feel guilty and to make them feel beholden to the religion they were a part of. So instead, Nietzsche spoke about the idea of the free spirit, and he believed that this was the objective of how to live your life, to become a free spirit. And that is about having the psychological strength to create a life that is lived by your own values. It is about taking responsibility for living life with freedom. Now, this is closely related to Nietzsche's views about nihilism, but those are often very misunderstood. When he made his famous proclamation that God is dead, that wasn't a celebration of atheism, it was a warning. He realized that for centuries and centuries, millennia really, morality and meaning and everybody's lives were anchored in a divine order that had been very strictly described and that people had pretended was certain and was clear and was always the same and absolute. And he could see that this anchor no longer existed as human beings were exploring different ways of understanding the world and were being engaged in factual awareness of how things actually were that didn't cohere with what it said in religious texts. So that meant that he could see that humanity was facing a phase of nihilism. That means that they were condemned to falling into the belief that nothing matters, that everything is random. And that Nietzsche could see was a very dangerous phase. In this vacuum of nihilism, a human being becomes free away from religion and from prescription and from that dogmatic reality. But that is a terrifying, cold freedom that people will try to fill up with all sorts of other things. And he was very right about that. For the century after Nietzsche wrote about these things, we have seen this happening all through the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. that people have found ways of filling up that empty space, not always in very good ways at all, because they are no longer characters in a divine play. We are now, each of us, the playwright of a play that does not have a script yet. You stand away from the herd and you find yourself in a position of having to take the freedom to write the play of your life. And that is a very difficult thing to do. And rather like Søren Kierkegaard, watch my video on Søren Kierkegaard as well, rather like Kierkegaard, he thought there were 3 phases to this process of discovering how to write your own freedom, your own life. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the book I would strongly recommend you read, Nietzsche describes how the human spirit evolves towards true freedom through 3 stages. The first stage is that of the camel, very different to Kierkegaard, the camel. So the camel is the human being, or the spirit of the human being, that kneels down to be loaded up with heavy burdens and to carry them patiently through the desert. It follows thou shalt, the rules of tradition, of society, of religion still. It is a morally responsible way of doing things. It is a very dutiful way of doing things, and it is a very depressing way of doing things. Eventually, this leads you to rebel and to go into the phase that he goes, the stage of the lion. Now the spirit wants to capture its freedom. It wants to feel the spark of aliveness. It wants to become Lord in its own desert like the lion would. It fights, Nietzsche says, the great dragon of traditional values, and it says, I will. So it claims that freedom. It doesn't think it has free will, but it claims its capacity for making room for itself, of thinking for itself, of being free from the old masters. But it's not ready yet to create new values, so it could be quite aggressive and dangerous. But eventually we come to the ultimate stage of freedom, which is that of the phase of the child. The child, Nietzsche says, is innocence. It is about forgetting. It is about not caring. It is about starting every day as a new beginning, as a game, playing with life. The child has the freedom to create and to say yes to life. And that is how Nietzsche would like you to live, or how he wanted to live, which is about being in the now, thinking about the future, and not being reactive to the past. It is also about what he called Amor, fati, the love of your fate. That is probably Nietzsche's most challenging paradox regarding freedom. He thought it was the highest state of becoming a free human, which meant that instead of wishing that things were different or complaining about your facticity or the facts of life, you learn to embrace everything that happens, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Everything exactly as it is. because it is necessary. True freedom, Nietzsche said, is to be able to look at your life and to say, it's fine as it is. I'll be happy to live this same moment for 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times afterwards, into eternity, because I willed it thus. You transform it happened, or I don't like it, into I chose it. And I choose it to be just this way, forever after, if necessary. This is how Nietzsche says we come free. We become the Übermensch, the overman, the overhuman, the superhuman, the one who rises above these duties, these difficulties, and who has fully realized existential freedom. Not bound by slave morality, feeling pity or humility or herd thinking, because that's what he thinks slave morality is. Instead, exercising your will to power, not by dominating others, by the way, but by dominating your own instincts and weaknesses to create your own table of values. And that is what is often misunderstood about Nietzsche, that it is a path towards something, and it is a difficult path that we accept because that is the right way to live, self-creating and setting the standard for what will carry on forever and ever. Nietzsche said, the secret of reaping the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment from life is to live dangerously. Now, that is quite a tall order, and Nietzsche's view of existential freedom is probably one of the most challenging, my friend. I hope you find it interesting and that you go to my book, Beginning to Live the Art of Existential Freedom, to see what I've made of all that, to help you live a good life. Take care, my friend, and look out for the other videos on existential freedom.